What's up, everybody? Welcome back. We are here with some more NFL DFS picks and line of advice, this time for the single game showdown slate. Monday Night Football, FanDuel and DraftKings. We have the Chicago Bears and the Minnesota Vikings. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, single game $1 million winner. In this video, we'll talk about the injuries that impact the single game showdown slate for both DraftKings and FanDuel, discuss low risk lineup construction tips and strategies to help you win those GPPs with the largest prize pools. Let's not waste any time. Fortunately, this game doesn't have a ton of injuries that will impact how we build our lineups. And maybe it's unfortunately, not certainly not for the players' sake, but for our uniqueness and ownership's sake. On the Minnesota side, Justin Jefferson will not be activated off injured reserve tonight. There was belief that he would come back even last week, but they're taking his recovery super cautiously. They're going to take it through the bye next week, and then for the 5-game home stretch for the playoff run, bring him back at full strength. So for those of you in season long, yes, it sucks. We'll be without Jefferson for another 2 weeks, but the other side of that is we'll probably have him fully healthy and ready to go once they're out of the bye week. He will not play tonight. We'll see the same 3 wide receiver rotation we've been seeing since he's been out: Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, and Brandon Powell. Now on Chicago's side, somewhat of an impactful injury. 3-headed backfield when all the guys have been healthy for the last couple of weeks, especially with how Deonta Foreman performed in the absence of Khalil Herbert. But Foreman is out. High ankle sprain last week. He is doubtful to play. He will not play tonight. So he is out. That leaves us with just a 2-headed backfield in Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson. Note the price differences on DraftKings. Herbert is $6,800. Still too cheap. All these guys were priced as if Foreman was going to play. So both Herbert at $6,800 and Roschon Johnson down at $3K are too cheap on DraftKings. If we go over to FanDuel, we see that Foreman was priced at $9,500. Not really sure what their intention was with the pricing here, but Herbert is $11K, a little more realistic, while Roschon Johnson is down at $7,500, so still too cheap. And we'll talk about that once we go to low risk here in a second, how we expect this backfield to shake out. However, that's it. Those are the only 2 injuries we have to concern ourselves with. So the Minnesota side, fully healthy. We won't see any changes, more than likely, to how they've been deploying their guys the past couple of games, which is unfortunate from a showdown perspective. We don't really have any mispricings, and it makes it difficult to get different when we know what they're going to do. Whereas the Chicago side, they're going to play everybody as they've been playing outside of the running back position. So that's really the only spot of differentiation and speculation when it comes to playing time tonight, which is a stark difference from how we've been seeing a lot of these recent showdown slates when we've been doing these videos. So let's talk about low-risk lineups now. 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads. Just have to beat half the field to double your money. Historically, and if you've read our showdown guide, if you haven't already, we might do a Cyber Monday sale today. So keep an eye out for that through our Twitter or an email. But our showdown guide, which goes through historical data, how to beat showdown contests. And when we talk about low risk contests, we have 2 strategies: either play the obvious values, not many today, or try to lock up all the scoring by playing both quarterbacks and both running backs. Now, that second part is also difficult because we have split backfields. So if we start on the Chicago side, if we look at last week, so Khalil Herbert, Deonta Foreman went out early third quarter. So it looked like a pretty even split all around. If you look at total overall snaps, it was Herbert 35 to Roschon's 27. So about an 8-snap difference. It was a little bit tighter in the second half, which is notable to me because Chicago was leading that entire second half, and you would expect in that game script that Herbert would be the guy taking a majority of the touches, as he did early in the season, while Roschon is known for his pass blocking, his route running, his hands, things of that nature. Great pure runner as well, but on this team, his role has been third down, pass protecting type of back. But the snaps were pretty equal despite the leading game script for Chicago last week. Maybe a sign of things to come. Now, Herbert is coming off a high ankle sprain himself. Running backs have notoriously worse efficiency returning from a high ankle sprain, unless, of course, your name is Kyron Williams, which, by the way, if you're not a member of OccupyFantasy.com, he was our number 1 running back. Yesterday, all of our members had huge days as a result. Less than 20% ownership for our top running back. I guess the model knew that Kyron is the best running back in the league, and then ankle sprain would not affect him. But we saw Herbert last week, just 2.2 yards per carry, and you look at Roschon, 5 yards per carry, and maybe that's what led to the more even workload. Is okay, Roschon's more efficient. Herbert's still struggling with that injury, which running backs typically do. Now he's got another week back. We'll see how this plays out. But either way, we expect Roschon to split some work, probably more so than earlier in the season. And at just $3K, he's probably the preferred option. Both these guys are cheap enough that where you could play both in low risk lineups. Herbert at 68, Roschon at 3K. On Minnesota side, they also have a split backfield, and to me, it's very similar. If you've been watching football or playing fantasy, it's kind of similar to the Zeke Pollard situation from a couple of years ago, where Madison hasn't been efficient, but he's getting the majority of the reps. So you look at last week, 48 snaps for Alexander Madison. Looked good last week against Denver's rush defense, as most running backs do, but has easily been the less efficient back when it comes to him and Ty Chandler, who's gotten more work since Cam Akers went down with his Achilles injury. And we look at Ty Chandler, $5,800, overpriced in terms of workload, right? 10 to 12 to 14 opportunities, probably overpriced, but efficiency through the roof, as Tony Pollard had been. Similar to if you played last night or last couple of Ravens showdown slates, similar to Keaton Mitchell, who is getting less snaps than the starter and less touches, but absolutely explosive when they touch the ball. 7.3 yards per carry. We got the touchdown 2 weeks ago versus New Orleans. 9.3 yards per target last week. So Chandler has the opportunity. He'll probably get less work still. We don't see him overtaking Madison. The coaches haven't indicated that in any sense. But he could easily outperform Madison with his touches based on his explosive nature and how Madison has been inefficient so far this year. So all that being said, if we get both quarterbacks in, Fields and Dobbs. Fields, by the way, I just want to point this out. If we look at last week, 18 rushing attempts. I think the last quarterback to have 18 rushing attempts in a game was Fields last year. A vast majority of these were designed rushes, so just an extremely high floor and ceiling for Fields moving forward for the rest of the season. All right, Fields and Dobbs. Let's say we play the starters in Madison and Herbert. That leaves us with $4,500 left per player. We could play Roschon at 3K, and then we could play Chandler, the rare 4 running back, 2 quarterback lineup. That feels kind of gross to me. There's also another value in Brandon Powell, wide receiver 3. Not going to get a ton of targets, not completely mispriced, but if you get 3 to 5 targets at 2K, that's pretty decent. So you could play Powell instead of Roschon, 7K. That allows you to upgrade to no one because, or I guess you could play Cole Kmet here. You could swap around, but here the issue lies in this slate is if you play the running backs, they're splitting workloads. If you play all of them, you're likely sacrificing some PPR upside on DraftKings because you're fading DJ Moore, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, all of whom should see 6+ targets tonight. And Addison, particularly at his $8,200 price tag, makes it tough. So you could play this way. I just feel like there are way more ways this fails than succeeds compared to your typical low-risk slate. And the same applies on FanDuel as well. Go over to FanDuel. All right, Fields, Dobbs. You could play all these guys, right? You could play Herbert and Madison. Madison 10-5 is especially nice. And now you have $6,500 left per player. You basically have to punt this position. There are no viable $6,500 plays that are going to play a ton of snaps. We know historically that has not been the path. So you have to fade one of these running backs more than likely. I guess it would be Herbert based on the closer split workload and his inefficiency with the ankle sprain. So then you could play 87.50. You could play kicker, defense, Roschon, whoever you want. That's probably the better option. But either way, it's sketchy on both sides for low-risk contests. But this goes to say, for those of you looking for core plays, and especially for your high-risk lineups, you want to get 3, 4, 5 of these guys into your high-risk lineups. The core plays are both quarterbacks, all 4 running backs, Brandon Powell on DraftKings at his cheap price tag, and then Moore, Hawkinson, Addison. And you may say that's a mighty large core. Yeah, but those are the guys that are going to get the most touches, that are guaranteed to score the most points more than likely. And those are the guys you want to build your lineups around. The difficulty is picking which guys to fade and which ones to play in low-risk lineups where you just have to beat half the field. Now, let's actually talk about those high-risk contests, leagues, GPP satellites. You have to beat a lot of people to win a lot of money. We're talking 500 players or less or smaller field GPPs, more than 1,000 players. We're thinking large field GPPs, 20 max, 150 max, even single entry 3 max contests of that nature. But let's get the sponsored water sip in first before we talk about high-risk contests. Just kidding. It's not sponsored, but if someone wants to sponsor it, let us know. All right. So high-risk contests, right? Let's talk about some notes here, some angles that I've written down and discovered during my research for this game. I think the biggest thing we have to look at tonight, and as I mentioned during the injury section of the show, is that there isn't much playing time uncertainty outside of the Bears running back situation. And when you have less playing time uncertainty, that has less volatility. And when you have less volatility, that means less lower owned plays. You look tonight, we just have a handful of guys in that 10 to 20% range, and none are that great, and most of them are special teams players. And when you have less volatility, less lower owned plays, that typically leads to higher salary lineups, which typically leads to more duplicates. So if I haven't sold this slate for you yet, keep waiting. It does make it difficult to play high-risk contests tonight as well. There are a couple angles we can look at to try to attack that, but it is difficult with the lack of low-owned plays and the lack of uncertainty at most of the positions. So one angle you could play is we actually expect, with tonight a 43.5 point total, we expect the kickers to be higher owned collectively than the defenses on DraftKings. FanDuel, that is not the, oh, FanDuel, that's the case as well, as it normally is. So you look tonight, the kickers, we have Greg Joseph at 5K. We have Cairo Santos at $4,600. Both of these guys we expect to get over 20%. Joseph potentially even higher, not necessarily past that 5K kicker threshold that we've talked about in recent videos. But as a result, we see Vikings and Bears at $4,400 and $3,800 respectively will be lower owned. Vikings will teeter around that 20% mark. Bears will be under the 20% mark. So for the initial point of differentiation, small field or large field GPPs, if you're thinking of playing a kicker, you have that salary range left over, $3,500 to $5K. Consider a defense over the kickers tonight. That will give you an ownership break. It's not a great ownership break, but we're looking for small edges tonight. So defenses over kickers in high-risk contests is the way to go. The obvious one is captain or MVP leverage. Now, we've talked about it so many videos, it seems like recently, where MVP ownership, especially on FanDuel, has collected with just one or two guys. That's actually transferring over to DraftKings tonight as well. For FanDuel, we have, let's clear this. We have Fields and Dobbs combining for basically 75% of the MVP ownership. Fields with his rushing ability, Dobbs with his magic and his rushing ability. 75% of the field is likely going to play Fields or Dobbs at their MVP spot in the largest GPPs, and even more so in smaller GPPs. On DraftKings, it's very rare that we hit this number, but we expect both quarterbacks, Fields and Dobbs, to combine for 40%. Generally, that number is 20, 25%. But with their rushing ability, with the lack of true studs on the slate, with the running back ambiguity, Fields and Dobbs are going to approach 40% collectively in high-risk contests. And probably even more in smaller contests. So if you've been watching these videos, you know where this is going. The easy player pool, if you're making multiple lineups, the easy player pool strategy is to fade these guys at MVP and captain, eliminate a vast majority of the field if they're not optimal. Now, granted, projections, our model, really like these guys. So the ownership is warranted. This is more of a game theory play than a pure projections play. But if DJ Moore, these are the guys you would consider as a player pool instead of playing the quarterbacks, is DJ Moore, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison, and the running backs. 43.5 point total. Not a huge total, especially in this offensive era. But it's not a 30-point total either, but still on the lower side. And playing the running backs, hoping that Herbert or Madison or Chandler or Roshan lead the way for their respective teams. So the three main weapons in the passing game and all four running backs, I think, are in play. And as part of that smaller, as part of that larger, lower-owned MVP or captain player pool. So just correlate properly if you play those guys at captain or MVP. But I think it's great leverage tonight because, especially in the lower scoring game, we've seen this many times. If the quarterbacks don't rush for a touchdown, which fingers crossed, we don't get multiple quarterback rush touchdowns tonight if you play the strategy. If you do play the strategy, you want as many as possible. But if the game is lower scoring, which also, by the way, if the game is lower scoring, that's how you get less duplicated lineups historically. If the game is lower scoring, just one touchdown from one of these guys can be optimal captain or MVP. That could be enough to knock out the quarterbacks. So a final note on this player pool is that Jordan Addison is one of our underperforming wide receivers this week, which means he hasn't reached his expected fantasy points. His actual fantasy points based on how he's been used is lower than what it should be. Those guys typically have big games. Addison is one of those guys tonight. So Jordan Addison, underperforming wide receiver, probably the top of the non-quarterback captain MVP pool tonight. In the final strategy you could use, we've touched on this briefly. Haven't directly talked about it, but it is playing the running back twos over the running back ones. That is saving salary. So that is whether it's playing Ty Chandler, if I can find him here. Ty Chandler, there he is. Over, not necessarily in the captain, but in the flex as well. Ty Chandler over Alexander Madison, that would save you $1,600 on DraftKings. Roshan over Khalil Herbert saved you $3,800, 3K over $6,800. Same goes for FanDuel. Great way to save salary is if the backup running backs out efficiency, that's a word, outplay, outsnap the starters. So Madison 10-5 and Ty Chandler's 8-5, so that saves 2K. And Roshan is 75 versus Khalil's 11K, so that saves, $3,500. So all in all, it's a pretty tough slate and really difficult to get different. But the angles, just to recap, playing the running back twos over the running back ones, not playing the quarterbacks at captain and MVP, playing the defenses over the kickers in your flex spots. I'm sure some of you will ask, as we normally get, is it wise to play a defense or kicker in your captain and MVP spot? Typically, no. We don't see those win very often. Could this be a slate where it happens? Maybe. It's possible. 43.5 point total, not necessarily sure I would go there. Typically would look for lower totals. But it is in play. Just make sure you leave salary on the table if you do that. Typically, kicker captains don't leave as much salary, but defense captains that are optimal leave a ton of salary. So just keep that in mind if you're building these lineups for tonight. So that'll do it for this video. I appreciate you watching as always. We know there are a lot of YouTube content creators out there choosing to watch our videos. We appreciate you for that. For more information, you want the greater edge, read our daily plug at occupyfantasy.com. Link is in the description below. It'll be updated by 3 or 4 p.m. Eastern today. Our Occupy model ranks every player, FanDuel and DraftKings, with their projected showdown ownership. Our lineup builder allows you to build up to 300 lineups using our optimal lineup criteria. And what else? If you have questions, I'll monitor the channel throughout the day. So comment on the video below if you have questions. I will happily get back to you with an answer. Chat with others below. Give your opinions. If you want in-depth conversations, you want to meet and talk with other members of the Occupy Fantasy community, you want to chat with staff, join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/discord. The best way to do that, links in the description. And if you're not already, do us a favor, make sure you subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. It is free to do so. Not only does it help us, more subscribers, that's great, but it also lets you know whenever we upload videos, whenever we go live for any sport. And as I've said the last couple of videos, with the holidays coming, we have different slates, different timing. Just subscribing on YouTube is the best way to get notified whenever we push out any video content. And last request, give us a thumbs up. Let's get over 200 likes today. Let's see if we can do it. Thank you for watching. Brian Jester, Occupy Fantasy. Good luck in tonight's Bears and Vikings showdown slate.